Welcome everyone. We'll just give everyone a moment to join and then we can get started here. Hey everyone, for those of you who are just joining, we're just giving everyone a few moments here and then let's go. Alrighty. So we got a few registrants in here, so I'll get started. So for those of you who are just joining, welcome to our webinar. Today we'll discuss the benefits of SIM and why it should be used as a central point for organizations. And today we'll also be joined by our partners over at Sumo Logic. So we'll explain what SIM is and why it's important and how SIM could fit into your security posture. So let me start by telling you a little bit about our host organizations. Sumo Logic. So Sumo Logic empowers the people who power modern digital business through its continuous intelligence platform. Practitioners and developers around the world rely on Sumo Logic to gain real-time analytics and insights from their cloud-native applications, helping them ensure application reliability, secure and protect against modern security threats, and gain insights to their cloud infrastructures. Now let's talk a little bit about RSI. RSI is a premier managed IT security and compliance advisory service provider. We have professionals for all cybersecurity and compliance needs, from data privacy to PCI, healthcare data compliance, cyber defense, penetration testing, federal programs, and more. These are some of the services we specialize in as a full suite cybersecurity solution provider. We work with some of the world's leading companies, institutions, and governments to ensure the safety of their information and their compliance with applicable regulations. Now I'll introduce to you our panelists. Chaz is a field CTO at Sumo Logic, and he joined Sumo's cybersecurity team with over 10 years in the field, consulting with many federal agencies on SOC and SecOps best practices. In the federal space, he was the lead architect designing the Department of Commerce SIM solution, and also worked as a civilian within the NSA, conducting red team exercises and assessments. Commercially, he helped build new MSSP practices and security consulting services for Fortune 500 companies as a SIM architect. Chaz also enjoys teaching networking and cybersecurity as a professor at the University of Maryland Global College. Brandon Reed is a skilled and experienced information technology consultant and technical operations director with over 14 years of leadership, management, and information technology experience. Brandon's professional responsibilities include program management for managed IT services, service desk and network center operations, VCIO consulting, and architecting technology solutions. Brandon assembles and manages teams of IT professionals to provide efficient and effective technology support, and has a keen understanding of how managed IT services can be utilized to maximize the return on investment that outsourced technology support and consultation can provide. Before I pass it off to Brandon, I'll just go over a few FAQs. First, any questions you have throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Be sure to use the Q&A features to submit all of your questions throughout. Also, you'll receive a copy of the presentation, a CPE certificate, and a recording via email tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. Lastly, we just wanted to mention that due to the length of the presentation, we had to cut down on the section about SIM case studies. If you'd like to learn more about case studies involving SIM, please feel free to reach out and schedule a free consultation with one of our cybersecurity experts, and they'll be happy to dive into that more one-on-one with you. I will now pass it over to Brandon to take away.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Nico. As mentioned, my name is Brandon Reed. I'm the Director of Technical Services, and I'll be working with Chaz Clausen today to go over SIM. So let's start with the agenda. First off, we'll start with an overview of SIM, specifically what it is, why it's important, as well as where SIM fits in the security ecosystem. Then we'll move on to some SIM use cases, specifically the three biggest cases that we see, and that's on-premise, cloud infrastructure, as well as remote workforce. Then we'll move on and overview the process for setting up SIM itself, specifically through Sumo Logic. And then I will hand it over to Chaz Clausen for an overview of managing SIM, as well as an introduction to Sumo Logic and their cloud SIM service. So what is SIM? SIM stands for Security, Information, and Event Management. In essence, it's the process of managing security and information events that are generated by an array of technology devices, services, and processes. And this is actually accomplished through a deliberate approach of centralizing the collection, detection, investigation, and response to these events, which typically take the form of logs. These logs come from a variety of disparate sources in a network, and they can take a multitude of formats, but the overwhelming majority of them are essentially just structured text files with specific text strings within each file that allow you to parse out information based on text string matching to isolate specific log events that you might be interested in. But collecting log data in and of itself is really not all that difficult. The real challenge is making sense of all the noise that logs generate, understanding which logs have actionable alerts and which logs are either informational or benign to your security objectives. Since each log type has a different text format, your security team needs to know how to set up search strings for every log type in your environment and needs to understand what the logs are saying, as well as which logs need action or response. And this is actually where the power of a mature SIM process, and more specifically, the use of the Sumo Logic SIM Cloud comes into play. Using Sumo Logic's Cloud SIM platform and their enterprise technology, AI is employed to reduce and correlate your log noise, and their library of pre-built vendor templates allows you to quickly add a module for a specific vendor device or process, so you can easily utilize an array of pre-built scripts that are already tailored to the log files coming out of that device or that process. So in layman's terms, this basically means that a security team can easily glean valuable information from just about any log type out there without the need for a highly customized approach and setup. And this greatly reduces the ramp-up time and the institutional knowledge that must be accrued for a SIM analyst team to quickly add value to the firm's security profile. So why is SIM important? Well, at a strategic level, businesses must make security trade-offs all the time, weighing the benefits and costs of proactive security against the inherent risks in their business operations, and the need to take a cost-reasonable approach to IT security. Yet, as we've seen in recent news, high-profile security breaches can heavily impact business reputation and market share opportunities, and they often bubble up in areas of the security profile the firm was not anticipating or had neglected to focus on in their strategic security planning. And ultimately, this leads to potential litigation, monetary losses in the tens of thousands per day, loss of customers, and erosion of brand reputation and customer loyalty. The reality is that IT security is a spider web of overlapping security postures and approaches, and finding the right combination of tools and methods to create a complete IT security mosaic is challenging for most firms. Yet the common theme to all operations is a simple concept: transaction and receipt. It's in the process of conducting some type of transaction, like logging into your computer, buying something online, attempting to access a network, or just creating a new user account. These are all transactions that generate a receipt in the form of a log. This reality is why SIM is often central to any security profile and why it's mandated on just about every compliance framework known to humans. The bottom line is that you must collect and analyze all of your security transactional information so you can effectively respond to issues when they occur. So further developing this notion, Sumo Logic's Cloud SIM is a security platform from which a team can establish true SOC operations that connect to endpoint security, network and perimeter security, and are critical in governance, risk, and compliance efforts. Whether used as a means of satisfying mandated security controls across your enterprise, or just generating intelligence that can be utilized in security planning and logistics, you can maximize the impact of your IT security budget across the firm by implementing SIM operations. Remember, transactions and receipts are ubiquitous in information technology. Now, RSI Security has assessed, implemented, and currently manages SIM operations for a variety of clients as part of our consulting and our managed security services. We recognized early on that SIM would continue to evolve into a significant undergird for mature SOC operations. And we made the investment in building out our own managed offering on the Sumo Logic Cloud. So even if you can't afford a full-time SIM analyst team, you can easily outsource these operations at a fraction of the cost to enjoy the same benefits without the total investment required to mature them in-house. So now that we've seen where it fits in the ecosystem, let's move on and we'll review the 3 most common use cases for implementing SIM. So it's important to point out that these 3 use cases are not representative of all cases in terms of use cases for SIM, but they are, however, the 3 most common that we see in the SIM world, and for good reason. In today's corporate environment, there are typically 3 main locations where work transpires: at the office or a co-location, in an enterprise cloud like Azure or AWS, and now thanks to COVID-19, at home offices within the new emerging remote workforce. SIM can actually be deployed in all 3 of these scenarios to great effect with a single solution and provide a massive amount of risk mitigation for the firm as a result. So in the first scenario, on-premise will typically refer to a corporate or a satellite office location without in-house servers, as well as potentially outsourced co-location services. And that's basically where you lease IT equipment like servers and routers that are hosted for you. You have full administrative rights in most cases in these environments, and you're also primarily interested in logs from your servers, routers, switches, printers, and wireless access points as a result. So here you're going to want to leverage installed collectors for your operating systems, and they basically will send their logs securely to the Sumo Cloud. But then you also want to designate a single collector on your network in which all network devices outside of your server farm will be individually configured to ship their logs to. And then from there, the collector sends them securely to the cloud. In the second scenario, cloud infrastructure typically refers to third-party owned and operated enterprise clouds, the common ones being Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. And what you do is you use APIs and a web interface in most cases. You can use those tools in these clouds to set up and host applications and virtual servers. And you'll typically use approaches like infrastructure as a service or platform as a service for your operations. You have limited administrative rights in these environments, and you're primarily interested in application, server, and API transaction logs as a result. So here you're likely going to leverage Sumo hosted collectors for capturing the majority of your cloud service activity, but you might also use some installed collectors for your virtual servers if they're hosted in that enterprise cloud. So in the third scenario, remote workforce typically refers to a geographically distributed staff who are utilizing their homes or a shared workspace to conduct company business. So here they're using corporate issued devices, but they're likely leveraging their own internet service provider and their own home networking equipment. So you often have limited visibility and administrative control in these environments as a result. So you're primarily interested in just getting the endpoint logs from your corporate owned devices, and you'll leverage installed collectors for your endpoints in that scenario so that they can send their logs securely to the Sumo Cloud. So that's an overview of some of the use cases. Let's move into the setup process. And it's important to point out that a thoughtful approach is really required if you're planning on implementing SIM in your security posture. So what we have here is a typical 5-phase approach to rolling out SIM and specific to Sumo Logic. So in the first phase, planning, your initial planning needs to focus on confirming your asset profile by identifying every asset that generates logs that falls within the scope of what you're intending for your SIM footprint. For here, you can design your deployment based on an analyzed level of effort for each asset that you've determined is in scope and that you're going to configure for log capture. Once that's complete, you should have gleaned enough information to estimate your potential log ingestion rate, which is actually the amount of space in gigabytes that all of your combined logs generate on a daily basis. And I focus on this because most SIM services do charge based on how much log data you ingest. So it's really important to begin with this baseline estimate. From there, you'll move on to phase 2, which is deployment. And you're essentially ready to execute your planned deployment using the appropriate collector that you've determined for each asset in your profile. And remembering that any network devices will need to be individually configured to ship their logs to a collector that you've already set up in the network. Then from the Sumo console, you're going to confirm that you have all of your intended data sources, and then validate your log sets by reviewing raw log data to basically just confirm that you're honing in on the right stuff. You're collecting the right information, and that you've got the right logs that you're looking for. At that point, you're basically ready to establish an initial ingestion baseline, and that's actually conducted through a trial period in phase 3. So Sumo Logic is great because they allow for a trial period, and you can essentially just open the floodgates and just ingest all the logs possible, even knowing that there's going to be some logs that you're not interested in. You'll do that for roughly the 30 days, but during that process, you're also going to begin to do some initial customization of your log profiles. You want to use pre-built modules in a combination of custom scripting to refine that log analysis and basically to try to reduce the noise down to only the actionable logs that you're interested in. And Sumo does a great job of helping to correlate those logs and provide additional insights into the data to assist you during that process. So though after that trial period, you'll essentially arrive at a final ingestion baseline, and that's important because it informs your annual service costs for SIM, give or take. So then from there, you move into phase 4, which is a total customization. So once you've got that final ingestion baseline, it's been determined, the trial account is actually conveniently converted into a paid subscription. And now that the log sets have been defined and refined, you can begin the process of visualizing and acting on that log data. And you do this by using dashboards and alerts. And they're configured specifically for each log type that you're ingesting. So the dashboards are used by your SOC analysts on a daily basis to review and investigate potential threats. And the alerts are configured for those urgent and impactful log events that will require immediate escalation to your IT security team. So at that point, you can also start to think about incorporating SIM into your existing forensics process for your SOC, or potentially start developing one if you don't already have a SOC process in place. That leads to the 5th phase, refinement. And this is really kind of the beginning of that phase. It will be the end of roughly 90 days, and that'll continue on in perpetuity, and it's sort of an iterative and continuing cycle. But over time, you'll essentially refine that log analysis around your existing log sets, really dial it in, but you'll also be adding new data sources periodically, and then continuing the same refinement process that you went through with your original log set. And once you roughly crossed a quarter or 90-day mark, and you've been successfully executing SIM operations, at that point, you're in a position to finalize and incorporate your SIM policy and procedure into your existing corporate incident response plan. And that will codify your security posture within SIM for any compliance requirements that you might be subject to. So as I stated, more or less, generally speaking, this entire process up to the point of beginning refinement can be about 90 days, but a lot of that really does depend on the size and the complexity of the SIM rollout, how big the footprint is, and what the level of effort is to get those logs set up. All right, so now at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Chaz, and he'll be able to talk to us a little bit about managing Sumo Logic on the platform, as well as a little bit of an overview of the company.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon. So first of all, we're really excited to be working with RSI for a couple of reasons worth mentioning out of the gate. I love the Venn diagram that really has SIM at the center of a very good security program. And when you have a partner that's working with you that has that full suite of offerings, right, on the adversary emulation and the penetration testing, all the way to MDR and the incident response, it really creates that healthy feedback loop. When you have your detection tools in place, like a SIM, it's always critical to continually validate, right, that they're doing what you think that they're doing. It's interesting for me, having been in the SIM space for over a decade now, I guess, and then prior to that in the more like pen testing side of things. SIM has always had a bad name, right? It's got a bad rap, primarily because you almost had to have as much time just carrying feeding of the beast that SIM was, as you did actually using the tool, right? And Brandon could speak to this as well. Fortunately, we're in a different era now. Like the legacy SIM platforms that did require that heavy operate and maintenance is no longer the case. And we're operating now in a SaaS model, a cloud native world, where finally security is taking advantage of all of those powerful things that come with cloud compute and economies of scale. So that being said, we love doing a proof of values, and especially partnering with RSI when they take a very methodical approach to these POVs, we call them, primarily because they're not scary, right? A lot of, as you saw on the previous slide, a lot of the data sources are API driven, and that really means within 1 or 2 days, you've got all of the data feeding in, and you didn't have to architect out for these weird edge cases. Sometimes we jokingly say you don't have to build the church for Sunday, which means we handle the scale. Sumo Logic has a bulletproof backend. It's multi-tenant, meaning we've got thousands of customers running on it, and our SLAs are extremely high. It just works, right? So then when you work with Sumo Logic and RSI, it's more about getting value out of the SIM from day one. You're going to leverage our out-of-the-box rule content that gets updated twice a week globally, right? We have teams dedicated to that. You work with RSA to do any custom use cases or validation testing of that SIM platform. So if you've had a bad, I guess the bottom line is, if you've had a bad experience with SIM in the past, don't let that taint your judgment, giving it another shot. And for those of you that might still be running one of those legacy SIMs, expect a different experience, right? What you see here on the screen is what we call our Cloud SIM Enterprise display. It's kind of the overlay skin of our security data lake in the cloud, designed for the analyst. And one of the differentiators worth mentioning, without really spending too much time on it, is from day one, when you're investigating what we call insights, these high fidelity actionable alerts, they're presented to you in the timeline, right? So you get, and you can see the timeline there with those blue diamonds. You get the full attack lifecycle from beginning to end, everything that happened on a particular host, or maybe to a user or an IP address in this case. And so you don't have to be an SQL ninja. You don't have to be running a lot of searches. You hit the ground almost as a tier 2 analyst. So you're leveled up in that sense that you see beginning to end with the dwell time calculated. In this case, you can see at the bottom left there, we calculated the dwell time of 10 minutes, which is an aggressive, maybe attack pattern in this case, from the first reconnaissance to maybe data exfil or exploitation. Sometimes the dwell time might be, 20 days, right? So those data points are provided to the analyst at first click in, right, which is pretty powerful. And that's really kind of what I want to underscore here is, when you're running a SIM, a next-gen SIM like Sumo Logic, you're really operating at that, give me value, give me the meat right out of the gate, and don't don't require the analyst to do a lot of heavy search, right? And especially don't require, constant monitoring of health status and collectors, right? It's all done in the Sumo Logic cloud. And again, it just works. Go ahead and go to the next slide if you don't mind. Perfect. How did we get here, right? So how did Sumo Logic kind of evolve to be this next gen platform? Really, from day one, it was a lot of the early founders of ArcSight and those SIMs that kind of paved the way. But they saw the power of cloud, and this was over 10 years ago. I guess maybe 12 years now. They said, what if we could do security in a cloud in a way that alleviated that burden, right? And so no more big iron, no more data center footprint, no more punching holes in firewalls. Just move it all into the cloud, make it a SaaS service, give customers unlimited user accounts, unlimited search. Let them really just use the tool for that security visibility that's needed without, nickel and diming them and without, making it overly complex. So we've rapidly grown from there, and we're growing still. This is an exciting phase for us, as a lot of our partners now, MSSPs and MDRs, are looking at the power that they really get turnkey with a backend like Sumo Logic that they can bring to the table. And there's a couple differentiators here that are worth calling out. Not all data is created equal. So maybe you're bringing in some data that you have to do just to check the compliance box, maybe do occasional searching. One of the requests that came on to the Sumo Logic is, hey, it'd be nice if we could collect and search on this data, but not pay a premium price for it. Is that possible? So we really thought hard about it and said, well, what if we came up with kind of a data tiering model where you work with, the system owners and the stakeholders and the partners like RSI, and you determine what's the value of this data. Maybe you don't need to dashboard it. Maybe you don't need to run a rules engine, real-time correlation against it, but you still want to have it stored in that security data lake. Bring it in at pennies on the dollar, right? And so that tiered analytics approach now gives you different ways to bring the data in a cost-effective way, but not fall outside of compliance and not have to make that hard decision of this is a good data set, but we just can't afford to bring it in, right? That's another challenge that I frequently saw, in my past life. Now there's a place for all data. We can do it in kind of a cost-effective way with consultative advice from RSI and from Sumo Logic to really bring that data in. So you can see on the screen, there's a couple, lots of big numbers. We're crunching. We're one of the larger AWS customers because we are built on an AWS microservices backend. So as you can imagine, when you're bringing in this amount of data, it does require a lot of heavy cloud computational power to do it. But yeah, that's really where Sumo Logic is coming from. We can go ahead and go to the next slide there. And I kind of touched on this already, and Brandon, maybe you want to come over top as well. Really, the value that you get with a SaaS solution like Sumo Logic that's in the cloud is you will see the value from day one, right? You're going to come to us with, here's a core set of data sources. Maybe if you're mature enough to have predefined use cases, we love to drive towards those with you guys. But then at that point, you're really moving beyond that data onboarding phase, and you have 2, 3, 4 weeks of just proving out the platform itself. And this is one of the reasons that we really encourage customers and potential customers to don't believe the hype, right? Don't just read the marketing slick and say, that sounds pretty magical, let's buy it. Say, hey, prove it to me, and prove it to me with my own data, not a simulated sandbox of simulated attacks, but with my own data, right? And do it in a way that proves to me, after a few weeks time, I can see the value, and I can see the potential value as you continue to mature it. So it really, a lot of these points can be spoken to, but it's really better to prove them out. So, and as Brandon said, there's a lot of SIM use cases that we could talk about. And if you want more, from the trenches stories on, customers that came in and really leveled up their security program or their SecOps in a short amount of time, we could certainly provide those and would love to talk more about them. Brandon, any other points you want to cover or?
Yeah, just to point out that, again, from an advisory consulting standpoint, all the way over to fully outsourcing, we're prepared to get involved in any capacity when it comes to SIM. A lot of customers, will potentially use us as overflow for their SOC teams, or potentially outsource the entire thing, or just consult with us on design, feasibility, et cetera, keeping everything in-house. So we encourage you to reach out for a consultation if you fall anywhere within that space. And as Chaz mentioned, the fact that it's a SaaS platform, you're really leveraging a lot more infrastructure and economy of scale than you're ever really going to be able to build on your own. All right, so I think we'll move into Q&A at this point. I've been monitoring the Q&A box and it's very light. So I assume we've been thorough and comprehensive, but we'll give folks a minute or so here in case there's any questions that have come in.
Hard questions are good.
Yeah, we're prepared. We wanted to leave enough time for this too, so. Okay. Well, nothing like a thorough presentation. So I'm not sure, Nico, if there's anything else you want to mention at this point. Otherwise,
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to our partners over at Sumo Logic for joining us today. And thank you to Chaz and Brandon and everyone else that joined us today as well. We will be in touch via email tomorrow with a recording of the presentation slides, and your CPE certificate. So thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.